There are some readings that if you go to church on a fairly regular basis, you pretty much know. You've heard them enough times, or at least we think we know them. Sometimes we kind of get mixed up with some of the details. Christmas is a really good example of this. Most of what we know about the Christmas story comes from the Gospel according to Luke, but then there's also a very good story from Matthew, which is mostly ignored, but we take some things from Matthew, and so the Christmas story that we think we know is actually kind of a mashup of the two Gospels, all smooshed together, and then we throw in a bunch of sort of cultural expectation, and that's what we tell as the Christmas story. Easter can be sort of the same sort of way. Most of the time, what we hear is John's Gospel. And if you were courageous enough to come to our sunrise service this morning, that's the one you would have heard. That's the one that most people know. Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb alone and finds the stone rolled away. And in her confusion, she runs off to find her friends and bring them back. And unsurprisingly, the men are less than helpful. And so Mary is once again left alone. And she sees the empty tomb, she sees some angels, but then she turns and sees Jesus, who she doesn't recognize. She thinks he's the gardener, but she gets a hint because he's holding a chocolate egg. Okay, I made that part up. As I said, we don't know the stories completely. We try and memorize them, but there's cultural expectation. But Matthew's gospel isn't one that often gets heard, but it's a great story. Matthew's gospel is one of those stories in the Bible that probably better than being just read at church, it should be a part of like a modern action movie. It's really dramatic. And I'll read it to you, and I invite you to listen for some of the details that might seem a bit unexpected. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descending from heaven came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead. And indeed, he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you." So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." So right off the bat, did you notice that some of the details were just a little bit less familiar? It's two women this time. They're both named Mary, but there's two. There's one, Mary Magdalene. We're not told who the other Mary was. There were many Marys in Jesus' life. And they go together, and the stone is still in front of the opening to the tomb. So they think everything is just going to be as they expected. But then this is where things get dramatic. And this is one of my favorite parts of Matthew's gospel. This is great. An angel descends from the sky, and there's an earthquake. And then the stone rolls away from the tomb, and the angel, all casual, like just sits there on the stone. "Hey, how are you doing?" "Don't be afraid." But what a thing to say. Don't be afraid? Oh my goodness. The soldiers, the trained military from Rome, they've passed out in fear. They've fainted. They've seen their friend dead. They know that the Roman soldiers, the other ones that aren't fainted, are looking for them. They're trying to round up whichever Jesus followers haven't been caught yet, because this is a known criminal organization to Rome. But here they are. They are afraid, but they're always courageous. It's these women who have come to the tomb and have followed Jesus all the way through his ministry in good times and bad. It's the women that follow Jesus that were there when things got their worst, when all of the men went off and hid. It's the women who came to the tomb to mourn and to prepare the body for its final burial. It was always the women. So maybe the angel doesn't have to say, "Be not afraid," because maybe they've already got that part down. But then again, they've been through so much. Maybe they've been through so much trauma in the last few days that they're almost numb to it. We can only live in trauma for so long before we just start to adjust to this new reality, and maybe that's where these women are. Maybe they're in shock. But here they are at this tomb with the angel sitting on the rock. They haven't looked in the tomb yet. We haven't been told about that yet. But the angel goes to them and says, "Be not afraid, but I want you to go and talk to the other disciples and tell them what you've seen." And so they go off to the other disciples. And as they are going, they have an experience. Something has changed. They meet Jesus on the road. I can't imagine what was going through their minds at that point. Maybe they were thinking, "Oh, Jesus did say something about this, but I thought that was just a metaphor. But here he is." And they bow down and they worship. But you notice that they had to go on their way, rushing off with fear and joy before they see Jesus. They had to make those steps in faith, not knowing all the answers yet, but maybe thinking that if I can meet with the other disciples, maybe together we can figure out what's happening and what to do next. But even in their confusion and their stress and their shock, they still have the faith to go, and it's because they went that they experienced Jesus. And that is so often the way it happens in the Bible. Faith leads to extraordinary events. It is not extraordinary events that give people faith. Remember the story of the lepers that Jesus heals? They go off to the temple to be declared clean, and as they are going, they find that they have been healed. Peter jumps out of a boat to find that he can stand on the water, even if only for a moment. Jesus says to so many people, "It is your faith that made you well." Jesus didn't come and talk about a world that had already been reborn into God's realm, but talked about the world to come. Acts of faith leading to miraculous outcomes. And isn't that the way it's always been, not just in the Bible, but everywhere else? When the women following in the footsteps of the Marys centuries and centuries later dreamed of a time when women would have equal rights, they worked for it. They got into action. They fought for equal rights, and that dream, that faith in a world renewed came. Imagine the scientists and the doctors who dream of a time with a new cure or a new vaccine. And then they work for it, and then their faith pays off in the end. Jesus didn't come to tell us what had already happened. Jesus had the faith that God's realm could be a reality, and so he showed us a vision of what could be rather than what already was. This is how faith works, and it's one of those reasons that we can't shy away from the world as it is. We need to engage the world as it is, even while we are dreaming of a world to come. We need to recognize our challenges. We can recognize the places of death, the tombs, so that we can recognize new life. When that angel came down and there was an earthquake, you know why. You probably remember from science class why most earthquakes happen. It's when tectonic plates ram up against each other, push each other, grind against each other along a fault line. Well, Jesus' entire ministry was in response to faults. Not faults in the earth, but faults in the human heart. The fault of greed. And so Jesus comes and tells us what true wealth is. The fault of coercive power that only empowers those who already have more power than they can use at the expense of everyone else. And so Jesus shows that true power comes in servanthood. Jesus comes to tell us that the world is being renewed, that if we just let our faults be released, we can turn the world into something holy. And then there's that angel. Did you notice what the angel said before he sent the women off to find the other disciples? He said, "Look in the tomb." They had to see the place of death before they could recognize new life. And then they ran off, yes, with joy, but also with fear. And that's what this whole story is full of. It's full of these contrasts. Fault lines turning into holiness, death turning into life, fear and hope and joy coexisting. And this is so much of what our modern Christian faith is all about. It's living through these contrasts, living through the conflicts and the faults. It's understanding that there are challenges that we still need to face. We have troubles. It's impossible to deny that. You turn on the news and we start to feel that hopelessness. Maybe we too start to feel like we're in shock from so much trauma, so much bad news. But this is where Jesus does his best work. This is where Christians do their best work. Because it is in times of challenge, when we're facing the tomb that would contain death, that we can find new life. It is in these times of great challenge that we find that the fault lines in the human heart can be turned into holiness. So friends, this is the time. Whether you are feeling fear or anxiety, whether you are confused about the story, it is time to come together with faith. Understanding that we can't know the whole story, but faith that we need to join with these women and go to the world and say, Christ is alive. Thanks be to God.